Welcome, Bronco Nation. This very exciting series. I got Ron Counts on today, and we're going to be discussing a little series I'm liking to call 10 and 10, where we're going to be covering the top 10 questions facing Boise State football in 10 separate, right about 10-minute segments. I'm, of course, Bronco Blameyer. With me today is Ron Counts from the Idaho Statesman. For great Boise State coverage all season long, make sure that you follow Ron. Make sure you follow Idaho Statesman on Twitter. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel, of course. And then Ron is also going to be writing an accompanying article with each of these videos, going a little bit more in depth about what we discussed today. So make sure that you go and subscribe to the Idaho Statesman as well, so you don't miss out on any of that great content. Thank you all for being here, and let's get to the questions. Question for today is who will emerge as a star in the secondary? Last video, we discussed who would replace Matlock there as the leader on the defense, focusing mostly on the front seven. Today, we're going to be looking at that secondary. Who is going to emerge as a star? Of course, you've got to replace J.L. Skinner, but he's not the only one who's gone. Also, Tyreek Jones there from the nickel line slot. And then a starter from last season is a Biggers. Caleb Biggers not coming back either. And there's some other names out there that Tyreek LaBeouf and some other guys as well. So Boise State's got to find a new focal point there in the secondary, a new star to emerge. Who's it going to be? Throwing out some names of returning guys. You got Rodney Robinson, who we mentioned last video. He's a leader there. He came in a lot and played last season, 51 tackles, 3 interceptions. He had 9 tackles versus North Texas. Alexander Tubner, 38 tackles last season. He emerged as a new face on this defense that played well. Shea Oladipo, he was a guy that I think a lot of people have been excited for a couple of years here for Boise State. I know last season, my preview, I was really hyped on him. I was actually hoping he would take over at the nickel slot. Didn't end up working out, but he still was able to work his way onto the field. 37 tackles, also had a pick 6 for the team. I believe it was the only pick 6 of the year, but it was it was very impressive play for Boise State. And then Kanohi Kaniho coming back. He struggled a little bit there in that secondary. He had a couple guys go by him, but maybe he's developed. He's a little bit, I think he's a junior this year, so a little more experience. And then Markel Reed, another guy who was hurt last year. There was a lot of hype on him coming into the season. How has he recovered from the injury? Can he come and be a star in the secondary? There's some great returning guys. We'll talk about new faces later on, but of those guys I mentioned, anyone else you want to throw out, who do you think potentially rises as a star on this team?
Well, for me, number one is Shea Oladipo. I mean, the kid's just got unheard of ball skills. I mean, look, 2 years ago, his first extended action of his career against UTEP, he gets 2 interceptions in his first game. Just really strong kid, really good athlete. And we saw him. He started at nickel in the bowl game, played great. I think he had 7 tackles and a big pass breakup in that game. So he's just a guy that is physically ready. He's smart. He played a lot of different positions in high school. He really knows what everybody else in the defense is doing, and he's playing a really important position for this defense. That nickel is critical because that guy lines up on one-on-one pass coverage. He helps against the run. He rushes the passer. And Shea Oladipo is a guy that can do all of that. Number 2 for me is, again, a guy we talked about in our last video, Rodney Robinson, a guy who I think has the intangibles of a leader, who's very smart, who plays way bigger than himself. I mean, he's a diminutive guy, but he hits. He's got great ball skills. 3 interceptions last season, already started 16 games the past 2 years. So Oladipo and Rodney Robinson, to me, are the top 2 guys that I think are going to really emerge in this secondary.
I'm not going to say that I was the driver of the Oladipo hype train, but I was definitely early on in that. You're talking about that UTEP game coming in and getting those 2 picks right off that. A year that Boise State really hyped up their pick machine for sure, and he was part of that. Like I said, knows the ball. He's got great awareness. I think if Boise State puts him in this nickel position and starting this year, he's going to have a great performance. I think he could rise as that star for this team. But there's not just guys that are coming back. There's new faces that have been added to this roster. I know you've got a couple you want to talk about. What are some new faces for Boise State that you expect to have a potential big role and maybe become one of those rising stars?
Yeah, so number 1 for me is Amarion McCoy. He's a JUCO cornerback. He came in and he was a turnover machine in spring. He led the team in interceptions. He's a solid tackler. He's a smart guy. I think, especially if Markel Reed struggles with some health, I think he starts at corner this year at one of those corners. The other one to me, and maybe the most interesting addition to this secondary, is Titus Toller. He transferred in from Wisconsin. He was a 4-star recruit out of high school. He's a guy that can play at a high level. He hasn't played in a lot of games, but he's got the size, he's got the physicality. And the curious thing about this is, so they got to replace Skinner at that field safety position. And the top 2 options there are Alexander Tubner and Titus Toller. Tubner is a guy that's beloved by his teammates. He's an undersized guy, but he plays strong. He doesn't mind throwing his body around in the running game. So, maybe he gets that start. But Toller just comes in with that pedigree. He looks the part. He's a little bit bigger. Is he going to be a J.L. Skinner talent, national talent? I'm not sure about that. It's too early to say at this point. But I think, that position at field safety is going to be maybe the hottest competition this fall once they start camp.
Is there we talked about some of those guys that we think are going to be the stars on this defense, but again, it's all relative to who those are around you. Do you think that there's going to be a Skinner level star on this defense this year? Someone that captures that national attention, builds that draft hype? Is there that level of player in the secondary this year?
I'm not sure that we have that guy this year. Now, we have a guy that we can build for the future in that regard in Jalen Clark, the cornerback. He's a young guy. I believe he's a redshirt sophomore this year. He's a big physical player, really good athlete. We saw him get the start in the bowl game, got his first career interception there. He's a guy who I think if he continues to develop in 2 or 3 years could be that national talent. Is there a Skinner on this defense right now? I don't think so. A couple of years ago, I would have said Markel Reed was that guy, and still Markel Reed could be that guy. He's a long corner. NFL scouts love those long cornerbacks. He's a strong tackler. He's a smart player, but he's had so many injury concerns. 3 surgeries in 3 years, 2 season-ending injuries. I mean, that takes a toll on a player. So we just don't know where he's going to be. And then, if I have to look at another potential star on this defense, Shea Oladipo could be that guy. I'm not sure that Shea Oladipo translates to the NFL the same way that Skinner did. Oladipo is a little bit on the shorter side. He's maybe not that guy that's gonna, the NFL scouts are gonna drool over. Maybe he's more of a great college player, which is fine. But I'm just not sure he's that Skinner guy. So yeah, this year I don't think there's a Skinner on this defense, but there's definitely some guys in the future.
I equate the loss of Skinner on this defense to similar how the loss of Khalil Shakir was on the offense. You had this number one guy that was the unquestioned statistical leader there on the team for sure, bringing in all that draft hype, that guy that everyone's focusing on. And then last year we saw without Khalil Shakir, there was, instead of maybe just one wide receiver pop up, there was a spread of guys that showed up. And I think that we're probably looking at something similar maybe on the secondary, whereas maybe having that one number one guy that's the unquestioned star on the defense, you maybe have a scattering of stars, different guys contributing at different levels. We've got a little bit of time left here, so I want to just talk about one last thing. Where do you think Kaniho ends up in his role on this defense? There was a lot of hype from him that freshman year where he played so strong, and then last year there's a little bit of drop-offs, a lot of deep passes given up. Where do you think he recovers coming into his junior year? Where do you think he carves out his role this year on the defense?
Kaniho's another guy. He's got the bloodline. His brother was a big time star at Boise State, and Kono, he has some of those same traits. I'm just not sure he has the coverage skills at this point. When Kaniho came in early in his freshman year, what he did well was tackle. He steps up, he sticks his nose in there, and he doesn't mind hitting people. He's not the best in coverage. We've seen it a lot last year and his freshman year. He got burnt deep quite a bit. So he's got to work on that. I think he's going to get passed over a little bit. Again, I mentioned Marion McCoy. I think Kaniho probably becomes the 4th corner on this depth chart. Still get some playing time, but I'm not sure he's going to start this year. If Markel Reed's healthy, he starts at one corner. I think Jalen Clark starts at the other corner, and then Marion McCoy comes in and kind of fills in where he needs to be.
Well, we'll be looking to see who that star rises on defense. And our next video discussion is going to be looking at who the star is going to rise on offense. We'll be looking at who is going to take over as that true number one wide receiver, or if there is going to be one, that'll be part of that discussion. So make sure you guys stick around for that discussion. It's going to be a great one. Make sure you get and subscribe to all the previously mentioned socials, channels, sites mentioned in the intro. This has been a great first 5 videos in the series, and I'm looking forward to the next 5. Thanks so much for everybody for being here. As always, like, subscribe, and go Big Blue!